Thank you all for being here. I'm so excited that we get to talk with the author, Emily Skinner. She wrote the book Mind Hostage, among other books. Just a quick overview of what the book is about. It has been inspired by true events. The effects of anesthesia can linger post-op in a geriatric brain, as was the case with Susie's mother, Ginny. But something has gone terribly wrong. As Ginny's thoughts are being erased, she exposes shocking repressed memories, conspiracy, revelations that, if true, could mean Susie is in danger. So if your interest is tweaked by that synopsis, I'd like to encourage you to go to Amazon and pick up your copy. It's Mind Hostage by Emily Skinner. Okay, let's get into the Q&A with Emily and her book reviewers here. So this is fun and exciting. It's not every day an author gets to speak with her reviewers. So here we go. So first off, I'd like to ask, what kind of research did you do for this book?
A lot of since the book was inspired, a lot of the research was already done. So the anesthesia part of the story, the medical part of the story, was an ongoing process that I had encountered a few people who had had anesthesia issues. In one particular case that, as Susie says in the story, she encounters a wall, basically, where the doctors don't know how to deal with her loved one. And same as some of the situations that I had to encounter. And the research that I did was ongoing. So the book was developed from the research that I had done back when we helped find an answer to another person's, medical issue. So it became a novel, but it was, rather than write a dry medical article, I wanted to continue to write fiction, but also layer it into a story about women and the encounters that brought forth the mother's revelations. So,
hey, Emily, this is Carrie. The thing that I also liked about your book, I thought, to that point, in the end, I thought you did a nice job of kind of putting some things out. I thought it was almost a second book in and of itself, the amount of extra places that you would send other people around, the particular, the drug and, things to look up or other cases around anesthesia and how it impacts people as well. So I thought there was a lot of resources in the back of the book for, once people get done reading it, if they have a similar experience, they can go for some research. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you for bringing it up, because yes, in the back of the book, you first have the story, and then I do provide the research that Lisa is alluding to in the back of the book, because I wanted people to know legitimately what they could do to avoid similar circumstances, and also how to be a better caregiver if you're put in that position.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And going to the caregiver aspect, I've been recently kind of thrust into a position of having to advocate and being the person who takes the person to appointments. I'm curious what your advice might be for somebody who, isn't really set up for this, doesn't know how to do this, and all of a sudden must do this. What would you say they could do?
Well, you kind of basically need to have like a notepad or a phone or something that you can take notes and record information that you're receiving, so that you can follow up on questions. I mean, a lot of it's very common sense, but you want to be prepared, and you want to also have clarity with the person that you're representing, that it's okay for you to interject and ask the doctor questions or nurse, and be ready to help them make decisions, or be able to talk off the record when the doctors are out of the room. But you also you want to make sure that you have the same goals when you're going into an appointment, and what is it that they want to get out of the appointment. Sometimes elderly people like to visit doctors. and it's just like an outing and a visit. Other times, you'll be in a situation where there's, a situation where they need to solve some medical problems that they're having. And a lot of times I find that the elderly don't want to look sick in front of doctors. Oddly enough, they want to, be proud and look like they have it all together. But that's where you come in as a caregiver. You want to make sure that they're okay with you reminding them of things that you already know that they have in their, medical history. A lot of times medical history is something that people don't even remember. Some of the events that have happened in their life, whether it's a surgery, what medicines they can be allergic to, how they handle things. I mean, some people have a very, low threshold for pain, and some have a high threshold for pain. You kind of want to know those things and be able to talk to those things when you're in an appointment.
That's a really good point. I'd like to segue into the way our main character, Susie, handled her mother's advocacy. We didn't really see Susie as being the natural caretaker, and some have criticized her as being a little bit too mean. Why did you write her mean, and did you consider it mean at the time?
Well, actually, I didn't consider it mean. I considered it a very real world mother-daughter situation. I do not think mothers and daughters are just these lovely people who just always, like kowtow to each other and speak politely. So I really gave Susie the latitude to be herself. I had a dilemma with that. I really wanted to take her into a situation where she would be able to express herself, but also not restrict her. In the actual first draft of the book, she also has a romance with the doctor. That is gone from the book now, but that complicated her relationship a little bit too much. And that was also a dynamic that led into the relationship with the mother and the daughter, how she added this other person into their life. So with the mother and the daughter situation, I handled it like I handle my own mother. Not that I'm mean to my mother, but I'm honest with my mother sometimes. And sometimes she frustrates me and I just say what I really feel. And she says what she really feels. And that's the world, but I honestly didn't know if people understood that she was a frustrated caregiver. She was in a situation where she didn't necessarily have a problem being a caregiver, but she was overwhelmed. So the more she had on her plate, the less likely she would be to be just, warm and loving and welcoming, but she wasn't going to abandon her mother for any reason.
Yeah, I found that very relatable. You don't always present your best when you're overwhelmed like that. Yeah, Carrie.
Can I comment to that? I definitely, first of all, when you're dealing with a caregiver and there's an age difference. And there's also, in today's society, we're taking, she's a single mother. She's taking care of, even though her daughter's not necessarily in the house, she's still having to be involved with the daughter, take care of the daughter, take care of the mother. She can't get any answers. I thought it was real life, like, hello, we're in the system. We can't get any answers. Of course, she's not a happy camper. So I saw her as somebody that was overwhelmed, but, stuck in it thick and thin, trying to get answers. And I think that is reality, unfortunately.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
So Susie is quite a character. Was she based on someone or someone's,
Well, the way I write my books is I let my characters marinate and tell me their story. So sure, there's a little bit of me in her. And that's always the case with any story I write, but mostly my characters develop on their own, and I can try to direct them all I want, but they take me where they want to go. And that's how all of this works. The character Arnold that comes into the story was not a character that I really knew was going to be there. He arrived to the situation where she obviously had to have a job, and I had already outlined the book. But like I said, she really kind of develops from her own source, so to speak. I do not try to direct my characters. You can see me in a coffee shop. I'll be writing and I'll be like, you just what? You know, I mean, like, I really don't know. I'm going on the ride the same way you are, because I don't really know what's going to happen until it happens. I have the plot, but I don't know when we're going to land sometimes.
Nice. So Jeremiah has a question. What is the relationship between the mother and her neighbor? So that's another fascinating character, I thought. So tell us about the neighbor.
So the neighbor, Minnie, is a person who has come from basically the mother's past. So in other words, Susie knows her from being a young woman and living in this rural community. But they basically are a cloistered, so to speak, group of women who have lived this really quiet existence, and they know enough about each other and enough of what's happened in the community and how restrictive their lives have been, but they really are isolated. They know each other, but they really don't know each other. And that is something that's very common in my family. So maybe that comes from my family in a way, but the women that my mother, my grandmother, all of them, all were very quiet, private women who didn't talk about things that happened in the past, which is kind of what happens with Jenny and Susie and Minnie. So Minnie developed again as we were going back to Romeo, Florida. And I fell in love with that woman because she was, I had done some research at Tampa History Museum and learned a lot about Florida Indians, and she just kind of materialized, and I just thought she was such a cool person. And my characters are people to me. They're my friends. I love them. And I really did appreciate how Minnie was able to help Susie, but know that she had her own limitations. She couldn't be there for Jenny necessarily, but she could lend a hand. And she knew enough about what the whole family had gone through in the past, because they had lived on the same farmland, her family.
Yeah, I kind of got the impression that Minnie had just a few secrets that she was holding for Jenny. It was just kind of like, you don't really hear much about it, but she'll drop something in and you go, that's interesting. I didn't think of that. I thought that was a really interesting relationship. So another thing that came in from reviewers, and I must admit, I don't quite get this one either. So why is the focus of the book so negative? Do you consider the focus of the book to be negative?
I don't consider it to be negative. I consider it honest. And I wanted to keep it from an honest position where we're looking at a stressed out caregiver who, as Carrie just said, has multiple responsibilities and people in her life. And she's living in the real world. And perhaps I'm thinking, if you haven't encountered things like this, or if you live with, a family that's full of harmony and love and peace and joy, and you've never had some of the circumstances that's happened here, then maybe this is kind of foreign to you. But I felt like it was just honest and very real world. So.
Yeah, speaking of real world, I so related to when they were at physical therapy and Ginny's getting her physical therapy, but then Susie can't get up off the floor. I was like, oh my.
Yeah.
Woman of a certain age.
Yes. Yeah.
Totally relatable. When you wrote the flashbacks, you included slang that they would have spoken at the time. So how did you come up with that idea, and where did you find the slang to put into it?
Okay, so the flashbacks actually came from the beta readers. So when they read the first draft and the romance again that was in the book originally, they were saying that it confused them too much. And then we had this big scene at the end where we have to explain some of the dynamic. And it was obvious that there had to be a better way to get you to that story without just having this meeting that just over explains and makes everybody fall asleep trying to get through it. So the flashbacks were developed as a way to give you nuggets of Monica's story, who is Jenny's mother, and also kind of give you an idea of how the secrets that we all have in our families we know just enough, but we don't know the whole story, and we weren't there, and we can only piece together what we can find. So the research that went into that was, going to museums locally and in Florida that helped, put that piece of the puzzle together, because I really wanted Susie's understanding and Jenny to reveal what she knew of her mother, but I also wanted the viewer or the reader to be able to see the time. Did I answer the question? I don't know.
Yeah, pretty much, because it was more like a little window into the past. And I really did appreciate that. And it's interesting too, because, we always see people at what age they are, but we never see people at the age they were when they were teenagers and they were crazy and wild and fun, like all of this wild stuff. And then I thought that was interesting how you brought that in to the story.
Well, the slang, you mentioned the slang, and yes, I did go back and look up 1920s slang. So interestingly enough, when I put the book together, I knew that the old silent movie was going to be an important part of the puzzle. And I love that movie because it was a favorite of mine. So when I started doing the research on when that movie was released, I realized that the Tampa Theater, which is in Tampa, didn't open until 1926, and the movie came out in 1920. So I was like, okay, it still could have been a re-release of the movie and you could still see it, but I wanted to know where it really would have played. So I did reach out to the local libraries here in the History Museum, and there was not much information, but Tampa Theater knew that Victory Theater existed. I found it in a search with literally no information. So I was given the green light, or not the green light, but the information to go from the Tampa Library to the USF Library. The USF Library had paper copies, but they didn't have everything digital. So they actually scanned an article of the old Victory Theater, which is where in that day the movie would have shown, because what Tampa Theater explained to me was they were a Paramount Theater. So Paramount Theater would not have shown way down east. The Victory Theater actually would have been the likely candidate, because theaters were aligned with studios back then, which I learned through the research.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Wow. That's cool.
Okay, more questions. You do include a lot of historical landmarks and places. So what other places have you visited that you incorporated into the book?
Okay, so first of all, the sign Romeo was the landmark that I drove by because we have a little place in North Florida. And I saw that sign years ago, and I just said, someday that is going to be a location in a novel of mine. I just have to. How else can you not have a town named Romeo? So then I started doing the research. I went to Dunellen Library, which is where basically everybody who lived in Romeo and had a mail address ended up being part of Dunellen later. So I went to Dunellen, to the library there, and started researching at their library, kind of going around to the local towns. And then I finally found a book that gave me enough of a map of the 1800s to the early 1900s that would basically give me a roadmap to how I could structure them traveling by train as well as by road to the locations from Ocala down to Tampa and back. So then I also went to the Henry B. Plant Museum to do the research for the Tampa Bay Hotel, which is technically, well, it's now the University of Tampa. But when I went to do the research there, I had no clue that this was a prominent hotel in the day. I had only ever seen it as a Tampa college. And I didn't know that this had been a resort, and it had been built in the late 1800s, and it's still a beautiful property. So the Henry B. Plant Museum is just a small section in the front of the college now that you can actually see a lot of the old hotel. So I went there. I went to the Tampa History Museum to work on looking at everything related to old Tampa. So that gave me and then of course I went to the Tampa Theater. I had a very generous tour from the marketing director there. I went to Sulphur Springs to look for the old pool and resort if it existed. There's parts of it that still exist. So I went there, trying to think of, and of course, Ybor. And actually, I am thrilled to say I am doing a walking tour this week. I didn't get to do one because I didn't know it existed, but I'm going to the Tampa Mafia walking tour in Ybor next week so that I can kind of see how my story lines up with old Ybor. I had done research online about the Bolita game and the things that the gangsters did in Ybor in the time. So I've got a resource that is giving the tour that I get to see how accurate I was.
That's so cool. That is so
Wow.
cool. So I'd like to open this up to our book reviewers. So Jeremiah, first off, I'd like to start with you. Would you give us just an idea of your background and kind of what about the story interested you and what you thought about the book overall? If you have any questions for Emily, that would be, you could jump in with that as well.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm happy to have the opportunity to visit with this group today. And I think the thing that struck me the most with the book, Emily, was the combination of a great story, the espionage, the intrigue. You know, the scene that sticks with me though, more than any, is the bathroom scene during the hurricane. I mean, that scene just sticks in your brain, and yet it combined the espionage combined with the advocacy of a very real issue, was just an incredibly powerful way to open the novel.
Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
And Carrie, how about you?
Well, I thought it had everything in it. I would be remiss if I didn't say that Emily has quite a sense of humor, brings a lot of unique twists into her writing. I wish I could think of one right off the top of my head, but it's like, wow, who thinks of that? The other thing that I thought is, clearly very smart woman wrote this. I mean, how do you have so many twists and turns? And, you know, I think to dovetail on what Jeremy said, you know, you had health issues, which are real and live. You have a stressed out woman, which I think most of us can relate to on some level. You've got patterns, repeating patterns between mother, daughter, you know, there's some similarities in there. And I think, you know, and I get this sense that there's kind of a knowing through the book that something just isn't right. And then it sort of plays out in the, what I'm going to call the melodrama of the mom being in the hospital and, you know, the overwhelm and the something's not right. And wait a minute, these doctors don't have to answer the question, can I find a doctor? You know, so, you know, I like the forward and backwards component of it, where you learn about the, you know, the past family members, and just secrets that exist in a family, whether we know them or not. I think sometimes we know them. And I think that, you know, when somebody asked the question earlier in the night, why was the character angry? I think there's kind of a knowing that something isn't right. And then, you know, a culmination and a buildup into, why can't I get some answers? Why don't things make more sense? So, yeah. And I cannot believe all the, you know, the quips here, there, and yon throughout the book. I thought were really fun. And so, thank you.
I would like to add something. The genealogy aspect of, I mean, I obviously have another book that I published that was my grandmother's diary. And I watched Henry Louis Gates Jr. on Finding Your Roots on PBS. So I love the way he actually tells us that almost every one of his guests, whether it's an actor, an artist, a writer, whoever, politician, usually when he does the homework, he sees a trail, that there is something in the family line that gives that person that gift that they have in the future. And that was kind of part of, I mean, whether it's a gift or whether it's a curse, you have something in your bloodline that you pretty much don't even realize you relate to this individual somewhere along the path that you haven't met and you only have heard of, or maybe you haven't heard of. So that was kind of part of how I wanted to structure it by having the story of Monica. And I wanted to have it kind of have that genealogy feel to it, if that even felt like that to the reader, so that you can kind of see how you didn't get a conclusion on every piece of information in Monica's life. There's still, you know, questions out there, but at least you could see how when they got to the final meeting and it was presented to them, you could kind of see, okay, this is how I could piece my own story together, because the lawyer is telling them basically what he knows of their story, but you, the reader, were in on some of the journey with Monica, so you got to see that.
Yeah, that's true. I wonder, as we're kind of wrapping up here, I don't know if anybody has any other questions, you know, feel free. But I'm wondering, as we're wrapping up, there are so many things that you can pull out of this story. There could be the advocacy, there could be the idea of a past that you don't know about, and just, you know, so many different things. I'm wondering what you would like your readers to come away with when they read the book.
The most important thing I want is for them to understand that the primary reason I wrote it is that doctors don't have all the answers. That's the real story, bottom line. And nobody's going to take care of your family or you other than you. So you need to, first of all, make your wishes known, what you want in your care plan. And then you want to find somebody who really will follow through the way you would want them to. So that's the primary focus of the whole story. The rest of it was fun and interesting. And like I said, I wanted to be able to give people enough of a mystery to have something to, you know, get interested in, and not make it boring and dry. I wanted to go through the kind of genealogy part of it, because I think everybody is trying to find answers in their past and who their families are. And even, you know, to the opening of the book where she's saying, write my story. why don't we ask our family members what they mean when they say things, you know? And why don't we delve a little bit more into conversations that we may not have the chance to ever have again with our loved ones? So it's really about the mother and daughter relationship, and how we all can be better, you know, at taking care of each other and learning from each other before it's too late.
Well, and just think about it. If Susie hadn't done what she had done, the mom would never have recovered. They would have never figured out the rest of the thread. So again, a great intermix of advocacy, the past, conspiracy, mystery, fun. And I love when you say that the characters develop on their own. I think that I just, you know, I've never had the opportunity to talk with an author and hear a little bit behind their book. I'm amazed at the amount of research or kind of trails that you followed to give the book the extra depth. So I'm really glad I got invited to participate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, with that, I'd like to wrap it up with our author today, Emily Skinner, and her book, Mind Hostage. I want to thank our book reviewers, Jeremiah Cunningham and Carrie, our reviewer, for being here today. Thank you so much and have a great book.